Congratulations on taking this major step towards improving your health and well-being, not just now, but in the future. I'm passionate about this work and I'm really keen to help you as you progress through the programme. So I hope these podcasts will help inspire you and keep you motivated. Be aware though that this is not just a get better quick exercise, and I absolutely believe that my programme could well become a pivotal point in your life's journey and how you live your life from here onwards. If you can consider this programme as being a programme to help you learn to live a healthy, active and happy life, rather than trying to get rid of your pain, then this will be a really positive step. The pace of life these days and the information overload we all face daily means that our own self-care usually gets ignored. This results in the stuffing down of how we feel, and in fact often we're not even aware of anything apart from maybe feeling out of sorts. We've become so used to ploughing on regardless, moving immediately on to something else. So this is something else that we will focus on, because addressing this is hugely important, and ignoring this could mean either a plateauing of symptoms or a recurrence down the line. Past traumatic experiences might well play a big part in the situation you found yourself in. So now is the time to deal with those and the impact they've had on you since then, emotionally, physically, mentally, and even spiritually. However, many people tell me that they had a happy childhood and had no traumas at all. So they're really not sure what could be causing their pain or other persistent symptoms. However, when you understand that it's not just past repressed emotions, but those we aren't fully acknowledging in the present moment that can cause symptoms, maybe because we're too busy trying to cope or just get on with our lives, you can begin to see why anyone can experience stress-induced symptoms. This is where self-induced stress comes in. In other words, the stress we perceive as a result of how we respond to what's happening in our lives, rather than just the stressor itself. For example, this is affected by our beliefs and our learned behaviours, as well as by ruminating over events afterwards, or over-analysing, being self-critical, a people-pleaser, overly conscientious, etc. And although we're born with a personality, this is moulded by experiences and by our environment as a child. So even if you haven't had trauma as such, our past experiences still affect who we become, which includes our personality, learned behaviours and beliefs, which in turn can all create self-induced stress. So this is an area you'll look at, identifying how you create self-induced stress yourself and learning how to reduce this and become more stress resilient. Just as importantly, this programme will provide you with a great opportunity to look at ways to improve your own self-care. Maybe learning to become more allowing of yourself and what you perceive to be your limitations and faults, as well as those of others, and of course situations that you find yourself in. All this, as well as the understanding you gain and the self-empowering skills available as you work through the programme, will not only help you work towards resolving your pain, but will also help you become more stress resilient and therefore more able to cope with future challenges in your life, which all of us have to face at some point. Please do notice if you're putting pressure on yourself to get better now. Trying desperately to get rid of your pain or getting frustrated with it actually ramps up the pain. This is because as these emotions begin to surface, they trigger the emotional brain, which in turn activates the pain pathways more, resulting in an increase in pain levels. So rather than resisting the pain, it can help to recognise that the pain or other symptoms are telling you something. It's merely your mind and body communicating in the only way it knows how. It's telling you that you're not dealing with something well enough in your life, and it's protecting you from having to cope with what your unconscious mind perceives as a threat. This threat could be that you might be seen not to be coping with everything going on. Maybe you're on the verge of showing your vulnerability in some way, such as crying or breaking down publicly, or anything else that threatens your self-image or is perceived by your brain to be a threat. With all the conditioning we receive as we grow up from our family, our culture, community, etc., these can be perceived as hugely threatening, So the response itself can be extreme as our mind tries hard to avoid dealing with these threatening emotions so we can continue to cope and carry on. It's merely the oldest reptilian part of our brain responding automatically and perfectly naturally to a perceived threat. It's constantly on alert anyway for any threats to protect us. It's just that these days the threats are rarely life-threatening and more likely to be psychological. To understand how on earth this could happen and be blown out of all proportion, think of a spider. You might have learned at some point in your life that a spider is scary. And actually, if you're someone who completely freaks out when they see one, as I admit I used to, then clearly this response is way above what you would expect from seeing a tiny little thing with legs running around who wouldn't harm a fly. Actually, it would, but you know what I mean. It's not like it could kill us, unless of course you live in somewhere like Australia. But that's what our unconscious mind perceives it potentially could do. Hence the massive reaction. Now replace the thought of a spider with harmless activities such as bending, running, walking, sitting, or any other activity. And hopefully you can begin to see how your mind might perceive that to be dangerous. Especially when you believe that there is a physical problem that you might be exacerbating by doing these things. Yet these associations have just become learned behaviours, which can be unlearned as you train yourself to deal with the relevant fears and create more health-enhancing nerve pathways. So, on to another point which I hope will help before you begin. The more you focus on your body and constantly checking in on the level of pain you're experiencing, the more you're going to drive the pain cycle. These habits are driven by fear and not surprisingly create pressure. So it's important to break that habit. You can see from all this that it's important to address the fears relating to your pain and to identify and address the underlying causes of your pain. On a day-to-day basis, this could simply be by being mindful and focusing on how you feel instead of your pain or the area of the body that hurts, especially during times when your pain has been triggered or increases. In fact, even if you have constant pain, taking time out every now and again to feel how you're feeling rather than ignoring it and just carrying on can really help. In this field, we talk about thinking psychologically, but in fact it's probably not an ideal term because it's not about thinking at all. So maybe it should be called feeling psychologically. Sometimes people have told me that they understood thinking psychologically as having to constantly think about what's gone or going wrong in your life, how miserable you're feeling, or how angry you are, etc. That's not the idea, and in fact this in itself creates huge amounts of rumination, which fuels the pain cycle by creating fear, worry, anxiety, etc., which then keeps triggering the emotional brain to fire off the pain nerve pathways. This is the cycle we want to break, so we need to move the focus of your attention from the pain and your body to how you're feeling, as well as activities that enhance your life, improve your self-care, etc. If you ignore this and focus only on addressing your past emotional traumas without taking time to think psychologically, then the pain is likely to persist or even increase. In fact, there's a saying, what you resist persists, and this explains this situation perfectly. So thinking psychologically is about recognizing when the pain comes on or gets worse, but focusing on how you're feeling rather than rushing on with your day and ignoring it. And as you know by now, bottling it all up just ends up creating problems down the line, because all these minor traumas or emotional issues you face build up, adding to the unresolved emotional trauma that's fueling your pain. So by listening to your body and dealing with things as they come up or soon after, you can begin to deactivate the emotional charges that are driving your pain. We'll go into this in more depth on the actual program, but mindfulness and the letting go and emotional awareness strategies can really help as you address this. Sitting quietly and doing a body scan can also help. plus asking yourself what's causing the pain, and then being mindful and allowing your unconscious mind to process it. Often a thought or an image will pop up which might be helpful and which you can then address. In brief though, it can be helpful to stop, even just for a couple of minutes, to allow yourself to really feel how you feel without thinking about it. Most of us just tend to carry on and ignore how we're feeling, not taking time out to even notice it. So this can be challenging at first if you've never done it before. But it's about becoming still and being, rather than constantly doing, which is the norm these days. I mentioned mindfulness, and it will help you if you really learn and understand how much of a positive impact this can have on people's lives, because it can be hugely effective, not just in helping to resolve pain, but as a life skill to help you remain healthy in the future. In fact, the earlier you develop a habit of mindfulness during the day, and preferably setting aside a period for mindfulness meditation too, the better. Developing a practice of meditation can be a turning point for many people, and there's plenty of research now to vouch for this without going into it here, although it will be addressed within the programme. Personally, I found it to be a wonderful way to help me cope better with everything going on in my life. If you've never meditated before though, it would be helpful to go to the Get Some Headspace website, which provides information and guided meditation recordings to nurture you through learning how to meditate. So, as I hope you now understand, pain is a learned behaviour, or basically a habit. The pain pathways have become an habitual response, maybe linked to when you bend or run, for example, or maybe to a particular time of the day, such as on waking or last thing at night. And as we all know, sometimes habits can be difficult to break, and we need to be persistent. The aim when addressing any habit is to override the specific nerve pathways resulting in the behaviour, which can take time and persistence. But it's not a matter of trying hard. It's important to identify the underlying causes and any related activities and triggers that affect it, etc. Then you can begin to use the conscious part of the brain to start developing new, healthier nerve pathways to override the pain pathways that are being triggered. If you think of any habit, it's usually easier to change it if you plan ahead. So in other words, if you're on a healthy eating campaign, then making sure that you have healthy food around and that you've got rid of processed and sugary foods, for example, will make it easier for you to stick to it. Making sure you take your own lunch to work if you usually grab a takeaway will also make it easier to develop this new habit. When it comes to overriding a learned behaviour related to your pain, then it can also be helpful to plan ahead. For example, if you know that your pain increases when you sit down to watch TV in the evenings, then it can be helpful to change your routine. Maybe do something that will help distract you from ruminating. If there are worries and fears specifically causing you to ruminate, then set aside a few minutes to offload onto paper and then put them into perspective. There's so much more information on the programme about this, but for now, I'm going to mention a couple of tips that can be really helpful when you realise that you are ruminating or feeling anxious. Firstly, studies have shown that when you name an emotion that you're feeling, it can actually help diffuse that emotion. Therefore, when you're feeling angry, jealous, ashamed, worried, etc., name it and vocalise it. So by naming it, you've identified it and are acknowledging it, and it can remove the sting from the emotion. It causes you to be mindful, even just for a moment, to allow you to be emotionally aware of how you're feeling rather than stuffing it down and carrying on, or even acting out inappropriately because of the effect this emotion is having on you. This might be all you need to do, or you could also have what I call a freaky 2 minutes, offloading onto paper, or use the letting go strategy, etc. If you're feeling anxious, rather than just saying, I'm feeling anxious, look at what's causing it. It's a symptom in itself. Break it down and see if you can identify what triggered the anxiety. Then name that emotion, which is likely to be some sort of fear. Another really helpful idea is to disassociate yourself from your thoughts. We all have constant inner chatter, much of which is often pretty emotionally draining for us. These inner voices are based on our previous experiences and environment, past and present. They might include thoughts such as, I'm not good enough, I can't, big boys don't cry, etc. And this method is a way of separating ourselves from our thoughts and recognising that that's all they are, just thoughts. And generally they're not true and they're not a part of us. So all you need to do for this is to find a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle vertically. On the left, write down any worrying thoughts you're having, such as, I'm scared, I won't be able to finish this job in time. I don't think he likes me. What if he crashes on the journey, etc. Anything like that. Write them down, all down on the left-hand side of the paper in a list. You'll probably feel emotional as you do this, and that's fine. But it's not about therapeutic journaling where you're going to explore each statement. This is literally to acknowledge these thoughts and separate them from you as a person. Then look at the right side of the paper and with each phrase, rationalise them. This means looking at it as if you were advising a friend who was saying this to you, for example. What would you say to them to help them look at it rationally? Maybe you could suggest that they're just catastrophizing or trying to read the future. Maybe make suggestions as to how to deal with it and generally put it into perspective, etc. So now you're ready to begin the programme. Before you begin, you will need to complete the initial outcome measure forms, and this will all be explained once you log in. You'll be asked to complete them again at the end too, because this will provide us with a number of anonymous outcomes which will help us demonstrate the effectiveness of the programme itself. This will help us provide some evidence which is necessary to not only enable us to develop this work further, but also to prove that it works as we continue to work towards overcoming some of the resistance that we're facing in having this concept and approach more widely accepted. I would then suggest that you read everything through first to gain a good all-round understanding of how it works and to be able to benefit from the knowledge that comes later in the latter sections rather than just at the beginning, and rather than waiting until you reach that section. So doing this also means that if you come across a strategy that you feel might be helpful, you don't have to wait until you reach that section about it to be able to make use of it. Once you've read it all through, then go back and follow the programme, starting by completing the initial pre-assessment forms. Now, this is where you'll really begin to be able to identify what are the areas you need to most focus on, which allows you to personalise the programme to you. Undertaking this programme doesn't require taking hours every day or being overly structured in your programme, because this in itself can cause self-induced stress, especially when you don't follow it exactly as planned and then you're hard on yourself. You might want to begin by journaling regularly, but as time goes on, and if you feel you've addressed all your past issues, you don't need to journal every day. It is, however, a wonderful, quick and easy resource that can become a very helpful self-help strategy for dealing with day-to-day issues that pop up or when your buttons have been pressed. I use therapeutic journaling as and when I feel it would be beneficial, but not as a matter of course, and this is discussed later in the programme in more detail. One thing I would say at this point is to suggest that you notice when you're doing something because you feel you ought to or should do, and consider why you feel this way. If you feel like that about incorporating some of the strategies into your life, then it's worth exploring this. For example, you might not feel like journaling or meditating one day, yet you feel you ought to find time to fit it in. Consider whether a day off might actually be a good idea for you, to be sociable, have fun, just relax, because these are all things that anyone should be incorporating into their lives to boost their health and well-being. Constantly working on the programme or spending every moment thinking about it or thinking about your pain, or trying to decide whether you should do this, that, or the other, not surprisingly, creates inner turmoil. And this could hinder your recovery. So if this happens, consider why you feel you ought to do something, and maybe write it down on your rationalising thoughts paper to consider. Also, focusing on the benefits if you're indecisive about whether to do something or not can help if you realise you're just procrastinating. If you do decide to do it, even just making the conscious decision to do the activity because it's your choice, rather than because you feel you ought to, which is victim mode, can significantly reduce the self-induced stress that can be caused. So to finish, remember, if we don't look after ourselves, how can we be there for anyone else? This programme is about you. It will help you learn to improve your self-care and, where necessary, to nurture yourself in order to be able to not only resolve your pain, but live a more happy and healthy, active life. I'll leave you to it for now, but don't forget there's the forum and you can get in touch with me via a quick recorded message if you have any questions. Take your time and take time out to enjoy yourself too, because this is just as important. I'll be back in a week to see how you're doing and to provide you with some more tips and encouragement as you continue through the programme.